Hi, good afternoon. My name is Emily Sharp Goodpaster, and I'm a product specialist for EAS. I'd like to speak today about the concept of teaching to the test, as opposed to the holistic approach. Now, teaching to the test is very simply giving information and then testing that information at the end of the unit. So the test makes sure that students have memorized a series of procedures, rather than actually that they understand what they're doing. It is a test of their arbitrary knowledge rather than their capacity for logical thinking. And this is a misrepresentation of what students actually learn. We can teach students a series of vocabulary words, for example, for a reading test, but in the end, they don't really, and they may do very well on the test, but they don't really develop a broad vocabulary. Or if we give our students a series of drill test-like questions, they won't understand a skill or a concept in language. And if we pose that question in a different way, they will be unable to answer it. So this is the drawback of teaching to the test. And we're finding that it is not an appropriate approach for kids today. Holistic approach, on the other hand, is completely different. It is a view that looks at the whole picture. It is a whole 360-degree view of language, all of the components together. And they are not divisible in a meaningful way for education, which means that we are focusing on communicative English. It encompasses listening, reading, speaking, and writing, and all of the elements that make up a language and that give us the capacity to communicate. Educational Testing Service in Princeton has created, after 70 years of research and creating products, they have created the TOEFL Young Student Series, as well as the TOEIC test. Now, both of these tests are communicative, holistic approaches to assessments. They would look for the fact that if a student, a test taker, has achieved a certain level of communicative ability, and that is the objective of a holistic assessment. So I'd like to take a look now a little bit at the difference between the traditional approach to language teaching and the holistic approach. So let's take a look at the chart. Let's take a look at some of the differences. A traditional approach focuses on language as a sequence of grammatical patterns, rather than the holistic, which focuses on communication. In traditional teaching, language items are based on the complexity of linguistic criteria, rather than the language a learner really needs to know in order to communicate. Language use is more formal and bookish, rather than genuine everyday language is emphasized here. And we need that. We need idiomatic, colloquial, and everyday language. Traditional aim is to have students produce formally correct sentences, rather than have the students communicate effectively and to complete a task effectively. That's the aim of a holistic approach. Reading and writing are emphasized. In holistic, we give more attention to the speaking. The speaking is given equal or more attention and tends to be teacher-oriented. So we have a standard traditional teacher in front of a class rather than the holistic approach, which uses the whole student's body working together and each individual as participant. And lastly, the focus is on the form of expression rather than the content. This is a very important idea. The form is more important than the content, but in communicative language, the content is more important than the form. Okay, now I'd like to give you a couple of examples. If we give our children a task or an activity to do in class together, for example, cleaning the blackboard or distributing materials, collecting materials, and they do this activity together in the target language, expressing themselves between each other and communicating in their own natural language, this would be a holistic approach to a class activity. Or we take one idea, an interest a child has. For example, if a child likes cars, we look at everything that is involved around cars. Does your family have a car? What color is the car? What do they use it for? Who invented the first wheel, for example, the history? Are cars a good thing for our environment, or are they a negative thing? Do we have alternatives to cars? Do we need to change the way that we use cars, etc.? It can go on. And so it covers all of the aspects of a child's life. So it goes into the social, the emotional. It talks about empathy, about understanding, and the most important elements of a child's upbringing. So the change in education today is moving away from the standardization of learning tangible, measurable skills, because in the past we measured these skills as in an excessive way. And this is not necessarily a good approach for children. And for some children, it can be psychologically unhealthy. The biggest benefit of holistic teaching and assessments is not just about mental development, but it encourages psychological, social, emotional growth. It instills motivation. It gives children creativity to explore. It gives them interest in what they're doing. So it opens up a whole new amount of doors rather than the traditional approach. And in the end result, what happens is that we have young learners and students who are able to express themselves in their own individual way. So we look at the individual and their own learning style, and we help them down their path so that they can be able to communicate independently in the target language. And that is what essentially we want for our children. So thanks very much. I appreciate your listening, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.